You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on October 9th. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 221. Welcome to the 221st episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing some of the ways over the years that I've managed to drastically reduce my sugar and simple carbohydrate intake. Now, full disclosure, I was a bit of a sugarholic for pretty much my whole life. And as a little girl, I ate a lot of sugar. I ate a lot of gummy candies. And even throughout my teenage life and early 20s, it was still a thing. It was still going on. So I would say that I've eaten my fair share of sugar. I feel like I've eaten a lifetime of sugar. And so given my sugar loving history, I think that part of the reason I wanted to share this is because this isn't something that was easy for me. And what I'm sharing with you, the different things that I've done, these are things that I've implemented quite literally over the past 10 years. So it's been a very gradual process for me. And what's also interesting is at the end, when I'm finished going through all the things that I've done to reduce sugar, I'm going to share with you how it has changed and affected my cycles. So you're going to want to listen to the end because it even surprised me. Yeah, and I've been charting my cycle for a super long time. If you're listening to this episode in real time, there are still spaces available for my upcoming 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. So if you're new to the podcast, every so often I host a live 10-week group program where we actually meet. We meet via video call. Online, we meet for 10 weeks straight. And this is a class. It's like a fertility awareness throwdown. So in this class, you learn how to chart your cycles confidently, how to chart your cervical mucus, and really get down to the nitty-gritty of it. So there's no gray area. You really leave the class knowing which days are fertile, which days are not, and you're able to kind of define that really definitively. You're able to really understand your cervix. I know for a lot of women in the class, it's the first time that they've found their cervix or at least understood their cervix. So we go through that in great detail. And also basal body temperature. We really talk about all the different things that can affect your basal body temperature, how to chart it accurately, how to feel really confident about it, even when you have some kind of weird stuff going on. It just really takes you through the whole process. And I think my favorite part of the program, why I designed it this way, is that it takes you through a period of about 3 months. So we get to chart together. For most women, 3 charts, so 2 to 3 full charts together. And that gives you an opportunity not just to learn the information like in a textbook kind of way, but also to apply it while you're still in the group so that all the questions that come up, and trust me, all of the questions will come up, you have an opportunity to have those addressed. So at the end of the program, you leave really, really confident. You can chart your cycles, you understand all the signs, and we've also had an opportunity to make some connections between your cycle and your overall health. So I love doing the group. It's always great fun. I attract the nicest, sweetest women to me, and so we always have a really, really great group. And it's nice to have a mixture. So in this group, it's a combined group where women are trying to conceive, women are trying to avoid. What's nice about that is that when you're in a certain stage, you often don't think about the things that are happening, later on, or things that you may experience down the line. So part of the value is to see different situations and you may not yet be experiencing. That really speeds up the learning curve and really prepares you for all the different things that can happen as you chart throughout your reproductive life. So I hope to see you in there. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and apply now so that we can make sure to reserve your spot. And if you have questions about the program, make sure to schedule a 15-minute consultation with me. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode. All right, ladies. So today I'm going to be pulling back the curtain and sharing the top 10 things that I have done over the past like 10 years to gradually reduce my sugar consumption. So as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I definitely, sugar has been one of the things that has been hardest for me. So for you, it might not be a thing. Not everybody is like a sugar addict like I was, but definitely I was. And so this has definitely, it's been a process for me. And some of the steps have been easier than others. And some of the things that I'm doing now, I didn't necessarily even think about doing a long time ago. And I think the first sentiment about my process, if I really think about where I started from and where I am today, is that there's a lot of sources of sugar that I didn't ever think of as sugar, especially as a young person. So if I think about where I was at with all of this when I was like 19 or 20, like it really wasn't crossing my mind. And so I'll take you over the journey and try to share with you some of the insights that I've gained in the hopes that maybe you'll gain some insights as well. And you can find some ways to reduce your sugar consumption, even if you didn't think it was a problem. So just to put it out there, we think of sugar, especially when I was growing up. So to share a little bit of my mindset and how that shift, I used to think of sugar as gummy candies, like white sugar or white sugar. So what we obviously can consider sugar. And, now that I've learned more and now that I've been through all these years of charting and just various stages of learning and development, obviously, doing the podcast, my perspective about what constitutes sugar has definitely shifted. And so everything that you put in your mouth falls into one of three macronutrient categories. So we've got protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And so none of these categories are good or bad. And I think that it just stands to reason that within each category, if you're looking to improve your cycles and your health, you're going to want to think about, okay, well, which type of macronutrient is healthier or which is more nutrient dense per se, or even less problematic. So however you think about it. So if you think about the category of carbohydrates, I think it's fairly obvious that gummy candies and like chocolate bars aren't the best source of carbohydrates. But what's interesting is that there are nuances within that category. And so I know I've had this conversation with my mom a lot because when you're eating, for instance, like bread and pasta and a lot of, simple carbohydrates, that your body perceives that as sugar. So when you consume those foods, your body breaks it down in a very similar way as if you were drinking a pop or if you were eating a gummy candy, because, glucose is glucose in many ways. So that's just part of what has changed for me over the years, really looking at this a little bit more complex and also getting older. So the things that I could get away with when I was 20, the things that I could eat and do and how it wouldn't really affect me, that has changed. So, as I record this, I'm 35 years old. And as much as I don't really feel different, I know that my body definitely responds different. So whereas when I was like 20, I could eat all kinds of sugar and it didn't seem to make much of a difference. Now I really notice a difference in my energy, my mood, and my menstrual cycle. So it's just a real thing as you get older. So for those of you who are listening who are in your early 20s, you haven't perhaps hit this stage yet. But for those of you who are in your late 20s, early 30s, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because all of a sudden it's just not the same. Like you can't take your body for granted like you used to. You can't, go out and stay up all night and like drink all the alcohol and like expect to wake up the next day and feel okay. Like it really, it really throws your body as you get older. Or maybe that's just me, but whatever the case, I'm just sharing my experience. So let's jump into it. Okay. So one of the first things that I did, and I would say that, to preface all of this, I mean, I don't believe in absolutes and I don't live my life in a super restrictive way. So the things that I have done gradually over time, I mean, there's no like rule. So even if I have mostly avoided a certain category, there's really, no time that I would say I would never eat this. Like if I'm on vacation in Italy or something like that, I'm going to have some pasta, right? So I just want to preface it by saying that my whole philosophy is not to be super restrictive but just generally trying to create habits. So I believe that the day-to-day habits are what's most important, and you can actually give yourself the occasional whatever you want, but as long as your daily habits are consistent. So just so that you have a sense of like how I approach all this dietary stuff. So the first thing that I did quite some time ago when I was younger, like in my 20s, it started by more of reducing. But these days, I've replaced juice and pop. So basically, like sweet drinks full of sugar with water. And for the most part, the only thing that I drink is water. I don't really drink juice anymore. Sometimes I'll do like fermented beverages. For a while, I was making kombucha and I was making water kefir. But for the most part, I drink water. And I also drink milk. So I drink raw whole milk and I drink kefir. But I'm just putting that out there because as I was making the list of what to talk about for this episode, I kind of forgot that because that's something that I did a long time ago. So what prompted me to reduce my juice consumption years ago, like I don't know exactly how many years ago, but many years ago, at least like 10 years ago. So it was quite a few years ago, but one of my family members went through a bit of a health challenge. And what happened was one of my family members was diagnosed with pre-diabetes, and she went to see a nutritionist, a dietitian, and kind of organize how to adjust diet to see if that could prevent the actual, onslaught of diabetes. And what happened was at that stage, she was advised to cut out the juice, or at least to like mix the juice with water. So instead of just having like the full glass of juice, I think she was advised to like mix the water with the juice. And I remember that she told me that the dietitian advised her that when you're drinking like a glass of orange juice, it's like you're eating 5 oranges without the pulp and all of the fiber and stuff like that. And I remember that really stuck with me. So I didn't know as much about nutrition as I do now, but just having that visual, like, oh wow, like when you're drinking a glass of juice, it's like you're eating 5 oranges or 5 apples or but just straight, basically just the fruit sugars, that really left an impression on me. So over the years, I used to drink juice just constantly, like daily. I used to buy all this juice and like drink it all the time. Like I loved the mango juice and like all the, yeah. And over the years, I reduced it, started diluting it a little bit. And your taste buds change when you make changes like this over time. Like, so even right now, if I were to, like, I wouldn't enjoy a glass of like regularly just juice, as strange as that might sound, because to me, it tastes so sweet that I just wouldn't enjoy it. So my taste buds have definitely changed over time. And this is not something I did like in a week. This is something over the years. So I started by kind of diluting and gradually, but over the years, it's just water for me now. And I'm completely fine with that. It's something that I don't even think about. It's something that as I was preparing for this episode, I was like, oh yeah, I don't drink juice. That's a thing. Let me talk about that. And so that's just one thing. And I think it's just something to think about and consider. So this is one of the challenges I faced as a mom, because I give my kids water. I give them water, I give them milk. But whenever we go out to social functions, there's this, kids are given juice boxes and all of that. And so what I find to be interesting is that when I think of the juice box, I mean, so in my case, what happens with my kids is that they have the juice box and then they like, run around like crazy and are super hyper after, because it actually is sugar. So even though it's like juice and, it's healthy and all that, it really is like a box of sugar. So that's just something to think about. So this, again, it's not like never drink juice or like only drink water, but it's more just, I think that there's value in just paying attention to what is happening and to kind of actually just kind of step outside of it and actually just observe how much juice you drink or how much pop you drink, and just think about how much sugar is going into it. And you can look at it because the juice has a similar sugar content as the pop. All right. So the second thing that I've done over the years is I've gone mostly gluten-free and reduced my grain consumption. So again, I say mostly because, and for me, this was related to my thyroid. So for those of you who listened to the podcast for a while, you'll know that I was diagnosed with a thyroid issue like a long time ago when I was in my 20s. And eventually when I started seeing a naturopath, one of the first things that she advised me to do was to stop eating gluten. And that was because it can exacerbate the condition. So for me, that was all I needed to hear. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to make my condition worse. So I really just cut out the bread. And at first, it was really hard for me. I had an episode, I'll link the episode, one of my reality series episodes where we were talking about this, and it was really funny. But as a West Indian girl, I mean, I just grew up eating bread all the time. Like it was a food group, like I had bread with breakfast, I had it with lunch, I had it with dinner, I had it for a snack. and I had it every day my whole life. And I really couldn't even picture what life would look like without bread. Like I remember just thinking like, what am I going to eat? Like it was such a huge part of my diet that I really had no idea how to even reduce it. But I mean, that was years and years ago. So this is basically, fast forward like a decade now. And it's not a big a deal anymore. But that's one of the ways that I've reduced I suppose you could just say carbohydrate consumption. And what's interesting is that, at first when you try to, remove something, you always replace it. So at first I would just buy the gluten-free bread and not really realizing that it's like, although it doesn't contain gluten, it definitely contains a significant amount of carbohydrate, even more than the bread. So over time, I eat differently now, which I'll get to a little bit. And reducing grain consumption. So again, as a West Indian girl, rice was like a food group. I wouldn't say you eat rice with every meal, but definitely every day. So as a little girl growing up, I ate rice almost every day. I would say like 80% of my 80% of the time was rice, and then probably the other 20% was like pasta and bread and other things. So it was just a constant everyday type of thing. And so when I say reduce my grain consumption, I don't mean eliminate. Like I still eat rice. I have rice in my house right now. But what's different is that I no longer rely on it for every single meal. And that took a little while for me to figure out how to make meals in a different way. But that's one of the things that I've done. And when I do make rice now, I eat lots more vegetables. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But when I do cook rice for my family, I'm typically having a smaller portion. So again, this is moderation. It's not me saying that I never or always, but it's more just these are some of the ways that I've drastically cut out sugar. And I do consider, the carbohydrate, like I consider the bread and the pasta to be like sugar, and because that's how they break down in your body, which may be confusing because I'm saying sugar and then talking about grains and pasta, but I'm putting them in the same category of carbohydrate. So, I mean, with that said, my son's birthday party was a couple of weeks ago, and I made a lasagna to bring, and I used pasta noodles. So again, this is not to say that I never eat, pasta or never eat grains or never eat rice. This is just to say that it's more of the daily habit. So the daily habit is such that, the majority of our meals are cooked with fresh vegetables and things like that, which we'll talk about. But I've just kind of reduced the consumption of the grains and the breads. Okay, so that's number 2. The third thing that I've done is I've changed my breakfast menu. So as a little girl growing up, I ate oatmeal or cream of wheat pretty much every day. That was the standard breakfast. And to this day, my parents eat like oatmeal every day. So I grew up eating oatmeal all the time. And even when I moved out of the house and went to university, I used to make oatmeal for myself and put it in a container and bring it with me to school. And I would bring it with me to work. Like I just ate oatmeal for 2 decades, straight up every day. But the challenge for me was that like this wasn't even initially about a sugar thing. It was that I would eat the oatmeal and then, so I'd go to work. I remember I had this job. I'd go to work. I would, eat my oatmeal that I cooked. So I would prepare in the morning, put it in a container, bring it. And so I'd eat my oatmeal at work, and it was like 8:30 and I'm hungry and I'm eating my oatmeal. And then at like 8:45, I would be hungry. And I feel like looking back, I would always be hungry. I would always be snacking throughout the day. And it took me a lot of years to realize that the oatmeal wasn't actually filling for me. So for me, it wasn't even about reducing sugar at first. It was about like, what am I going to eat so that I'm not hungry all the time? Because this oatmeal thing isn't working for me, because I would just be hungry. Like it would be like as if I didn't eat anything. And initially I thought that it was just me because I was just hungry all the time. But then later on I realized, no, it's because I just need to eat in a different way to feel satiated. So by changing my breakfast menu, what I mean is that instead of relying on oatmeal and fruit and just kind of only carbohydrates, I incorporated a combination of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So that's what I do now. So a typical breakfast in my house, look like maybe eggs and bacon. So it's a little bit more difficult if you aren't able to tolerate eggs. But yeah, eggs, bacon, or leftovers. So depending on what was left over from, dinner the night before, some sort of meat-based protein source is what kind of fills the protein box. The fat box, well, bacon contains sufficient fat, but depending on what's in season, avocados I love, throwing those in as a fat source. And then of course, eggs contain a good amount of fat as well. And then the other aspect of my breakfast would be vegetables. So depending on the day, depending on what's happening, or depending on what's for leftovers, it'll be like half a plate of vegetables. So sometimes right now it's a really great time of year. As I record this, it's fall and we've been loving the farmers market this year. So we've been going a lot, and one of my favorite things, they have these baby cucumbers and lots of delicious, cherry tomatoes and all kinds of stuff. So sometimes the vegetable component is just raw, just, cucumbers, cherry tomatoes, but whatever's really in season. So my breakfast has changed because now it consists of, like I said, a meat-based protein source, typically eggs, often, and then sometimes cheese, sometimes avocado as a fat source, and also like a ton of vegetables, so like half the plate. So to the point that it seems like, especially it looks a little strange if you've never had a breakfast like that, because it kind of looks like dinner. But what I find is that when I eat like a really good hearty breakfast, I'm not hungry. This isn't about eating less food. So I think that's something that I'll touch on now, and you'll notice it's a theme throughout this episode. By cutting out sugar and by kind of rearranging the way that I eat, it's not about eating less food at all. I eat more food. And so this is, by no means do I ever feel hungry. If you were to see me eat, you would be like, holy cow, why is she eating so much food? But really, I'm eating just way, way more vegetables and fruit. And so at the end, it's really like a big meal. So I've changed not only how I arrange my breakfast, but how I think about breakfast. So I think about breakfast as like a legit meal, where at the end of it, I really want to be satiated. So with that said, I don't always eat breakfast at like 7 o'clock in the morning, because I'm not necessarily hungry at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I really pay attention to my body. I start my day with like a tall glass of water or several, and I typically don't eat until I'm hungry. So for me, that might mean 9:30, 10 o'clock, but when it's time to eat, I'll eat. And I'll eat quite a bit. But I'm not forcing myself to eat before I feel hungry, if that makes sense. So I'll just put out there, not everybody has the ability to like make some big fancy meal every day. When you're on the go, there's definitely something to be said for finding a quick and easy type breakfast. So all kind of other options on my breakfast menu. If I've recently made a pot of bone broth or something like that, I'll often do something like a soup, where I have the bone broth and maybe throw in some vegetables or some meat or something, like I said, leftovers, and have more of like a soup for breakfast type scenario. And, paired with like an apple or whatever fruit is there. And also shakes. So one of my go-tos is often like a milkshake. And so since I make kefir, I always have like fresh homemade kefir at home. And so I'll often make it with its full fat kefir. So it has in all the fat, and I'll often throw in some egg yolks. So pastured egg yolks, I get my eggs from a farm. So I'll often throw those in for extra fat, and you can add in protein to make sure you're getting enough protein. So something like collagen or gelatin powder or something like that. So there's different ways to go about it. But I suppose what you're looking for is a mixture, protein, fat, and carbohydrates, to make sure you're actually getting enough protein, because you're not getting protein from oatmeal. Like I wasn't getting protein from oatmeal, and I wasn't getting enough fat. So I was always hungry. And so that's kind of the biggest change, like really trying to always keep that macronutrient ratio in my mind and making sure that I'm having a really good balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrates, and trying to get my carbohydrates from like fruit instead of from like grains or processed things like that. Okay, so number 4, and I've already alluded to this a little bit, I changed my plate. So I think I was trying to think of how to put it, and that's how I came up with it. So I changed my plate. So when it's time for me to eat a meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, I changed the way that my plate is organized. So before I started making these changes, my early 20s, I'm kind of picking on my younger self, but my plate would contain meat, a little bit of vegetables. So maybe like a quarter meat, a quarter vegetables, and then like half a plate of rice or something, or potatoes or pasta or something like that. So half of my plate was always like rice or always some sort of carbohydrate. So my plate looks a lot different now. And basically, yeah, we've just started eating way more vegetables. And I shouldn't say started because this has been the way that it is for years and years. But that's how, so my plate looks completely different. So when I'm thinking about what to cook for dinner. So for instance, I'll use last night as an example. So last night was kind of a lazy dinner. We did fish. So we had fish and I grilled it in the oven. And then we had squash and zucchini. And then we also had some cucumbers and tomatoes because we're loving the farmer's market still. So the plate was actually half vegetables. So on my plate, it was like mostly zucchinis, a little bit of squash. I had a little bit of the cucumbers there and then had the fish. But basically, the plate just looks a lot different. And I would say that has made a huge difference just in the reduction of the consumption. It's kind of like I removed the filler food and tried to fill the plate with more nutrient-dense options. And in this case, it's vegetables. So I'm not eating like way more meat or anything like that. I've just replaced a lot of the pasta and the rice with veg. But of course, West Indian family, we still have rice. And so when we cook the rice, it's just, I still cook a lot of vegetables. So even though we're having the rice, we're still having like quite a bit, like just way more vegetables. And of course, when I'm cooking vegetables, I'm tossing them in either butter or coconut oil or something like that. So there's still a bit of a fat component. So we're hitting all of the macronutrient categories. Okay, so number 5, one of the things that I did, and so this was more recent. My philosophy on fruit was always like, well, fruit is super healthy because it is. And so why would I ever limit my fruit consumption? Number 5, one of the things that I've more recently started doing is paying attention to my fruit consumption and focusing on low sugar fruits. So there would have been a time when I would never have even uttered that statement because I would have thought that it's just too ridiculous. I mean, why would you ever reduce your fruit consumption? I mean, fruit is fruit. It's full of antioxidants and all kinds of good stuff. So please don't take me the wrong way. I mean, I love fruit and I don't live my life in a way that I'm like limiting how much fruit I eat to some weird degree. But with that said, I love sugar. Like I am a sugarholic. Like I'm a recovering sugarholic. So it's like I replaced the gummy candies with fruit. And I would I'm thinking of a couple specific fruit cravings. But for instance, like I love mandarin oranges. Mandarin oranges are quite sweet. And sometimes I would sit there and eat like 5 or 6 of them, which again, like nothing wrong with eating 5 or 6 mandarin oranges. But I think in my case, what I've discovered over the years is, within my family, there's a history of diabetes and blood sugar issues and high blood pressure and things like that. And as I get older, I can see that I'm not immune to that. So I also have this kind of like in the back of my mind, like I know that I have a predisposition to sugar issues. And as I pay attention to my cycles and as I just all of those things, I recognize that for me personally, my body seems to be a little bit more sensitive to sugar. So I just want to kind of just clarify why this is an issue for me, and it's not an issue for everybody necessarily. But for me, I've just noticed over the years because I'm paying attention to my body, I'm charting, I can see how different things affect my cycle and, my ovulation, all that kind of stuff. So in my case, I had to have a conversation about that with myself. So basically what this means, I mean, I love fruit. I buy it all the time. You should see how much fruit I bring home from the farmer's market. But in my case, it just means I've paid attention to my consumption and kind of acknowledged that there's a difference between like high sugar fruits and low sugar fruits. So that's really all it is. So for example, like bananas are really high sugar fruit, especially if you eat them when they're like super overripe. Like grapes are a really high sugar fruit, depending on the type of grape and all that kind of stuff. And so, but berries, on the other hand, like blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, they're lower on the glycemic index. And they're also higher in their content of antioxidants and micronutrients and things like that. So for me, it's really not about eating less fruit or being super vigilant, but just more so about recognizing that there is a difference. And when possible, opting to buy blueberries and, strawberries and blackberries and just kind of paying attention to that. So one of the ways that I've reduced my sugar consumption is by focusing a little bit more on those nutrient dense, lower sugar fruit. So this summer we've, bought so much blueberries that I'm surprised we're all not blue. As opposed to buying a ton of like mandarin oranges or really high sugar fruits like I would usually buy. So I say this kind of with caution, and I think you could probably hear that caution in my voice because I'm really trying to stress that I do all things in moderation, and I'm really not saying like don't eat any fruit. Like that's the last thing I'm saying. I'm just saying, pay attention to that because if you, for example, I'll give myself an example. Like I love cherries, and I could buy, bags and bags of cherries and just sit there and eat them all because they're so yummy. But from like a sugar standpoint, doing that all the time, like every day, like regularly eating tons and tons and tons and tons of fruit, sugar is sugar as far as your body is concerned. So it's still rising your blood sugar and it's not balanced. It's not like by eating just a ton of sweet fruits all the time, you're not balancing your macronutrient ratio. Fruits don't contain protein and fat and all that kind of stuff. So it's just something to think about in terms of like fruits do count as sugar. So if you were to look at your whole day and you were looking at like, okay, gummy candies, juice, chocolate bars, but you were also looking at rice and bread and etc. And then fruit, all of those things fall under the category of carbohydrates. So you can overdo it on sweet fruits. And I am definitely like the first to do that because by cutting out a lot of the processed foods and all that kind of stuff, I mean, naturally I'm getting my sugar fix from fruit then. So so that's one of the things that I've done. So number 6, I have introduced some low glycemic sweeteners. So over the past several years, I've experimented with different types of sweeteners and, moving at first from a straight white sugar to, organic cane sugar where it's not, bleached or I don't know how they get it so white, but like kind of moving towards that, but it's still sugar, right? Sugar is still sugar. So it's not like white sugar, but it's, organic cane sugar, but it's still sugar. So that was kind of like my first transition point. But as I moved towards wanting to lower, the carbohydrate intake, the sugar intake, one of the things I've been, just experimenting with is different sweeteners. So one of the sweeteners that I've used quite a bit is coconut sugar, for example. So coconut sugar, you can find that at your local, organic store or, a health food store or something like that. So coconut sugar is still sugar, but it's much lower on the glycemic index. What the glycemic index tells you is how much a certain food raises your blood sugar. That's basically my understanding of the glycemic index. And so when you're eating like regular table sugar, it definitely raises your blood sugar quite a bit. But it's a big, if you've never looked at the glycemic index, I would encourage you to do like a super quick internet search and take a look at what's on there and think about everything you ate yesterday and just look at the glycemic index. And you'll see that some of the foods that you wouldn't necessarily think would raise your blood sugar, like whole wheat bread or something like that, raise your blood sugar quite significantly and often to the same degree as table sugar. So for example, with going back to coconut sugar, so with the coconut sugar, it's lower on the glycemic index. So although it still raises your blood sugar because it's still sugar, it raises your blood sugar less. So you're getting less of a hit. So that was one of my first ways to try to minimize at least the impact of sugar, feeling like I was getting less of it. But I've tried other sweeteners as well. So one of the sweeteners that I use more often now is stevia, and I've tried a sweetener called erythritol. And so basically those sweeteners are like, they don't raise your blood sugar. So stevia is derived from the leaf of a plant, and it has a sweet flavor. So it definitely sweetens your food. It can have a little bit of an aftertaste. So it just depends on how sensitive you are, but not too bad or anything. And similar with erythritol, but what happens is you are able to get a bit of a sweet flavor, but it doesn't have an effect on your blood sugar. So you're kind of skipping out the carbohydrates. So for me, I wouldn't have thought that the little bit of sugar or the little bit of maple syrup or like that I put into my smoothie or like I just would never have thought about that at all as being a thing and having an effect on my body. But as we'll talk about in a few minutes, by kind of like just switching up like adding a little sugar here, a little sugar there, switching that up and switching to stevia or erythritol, like switching to other sweeteners that are not having any impact on my blood sugar and are not increasing my carbohydrate and sugar intake, I've noticed like a really, really significant difference, which I would never have thought because I never thought that it was a big deal. I never really thought that it added up. And so it just depends. Like if you are a baker, then, I mean, that's one of the ways that I was using these different types of sweeteners. Like I would use the coconut sugar, maybe mix it with stevia or something, trying to figure out a better way to bake when I'm baking so that I could reduce the sugar amount or at least make it so that it was less. Like we're still having the sweet treat, but it's like less of a problem. So there's just different ways to play with it. So number 7, as you can already tell, as I went through the other ones, I reduced my processed food consumption. I feel like I just wanted to say that because I think it's pretty obvious as I go through everything that that's what happened. So, I mean, this has been a, process over the years. Like, so I still like, there's no, like we live in the world. So there's no, like, I never eat processed, like that's not a real thing. But I would say that a lot less, like by replacing a lot of what we eat, but with fresh food. I mean, I'll just put it out there too. I didn't mention it, but when you opt to cook fresh food all the time and like you opt to cook vegetables, like at every single meal, like fresh vegetables, it does change the dynamic because you have to cook and you have all these fresh vegetables in your fridge when you go to the store. And if you don't cook them, they rot, right? So, not it's a hard transition sometimes, especially if you are really busy or you work or you have a long commute or something like that. Like you just want to come home and eat, right? You don't want to have to spend half an hour cooking or something like that. It is possible. It doesn't have to be so time intensive to cook. I grill a lot of things. Like I have a lot, I call it like a lazy dinner where I'll just like cut up a bunch of vegetables and like throw a little bit of butter, coconut or something on them and season them real quick and like throw them in the oven and like grill them because it just takes minutes. And so you just put them in there, right? You don't have to do anything else. And similar with some of the meat choices that we'll have. So yeah, just to put it out there, when you shift to this type of way of kind of eating and things like that, like it definitely requires you to cook. So you're in the kitchen more because if you're doing fresh veg all the time, yeah, it requires a lot more. But yeah, so just by switching that up, then it kind of lends itself to eating less processed food. So whereas I used to buy a ton of pasta, I always have it on hand. Pasta was a really big part of like, it was always there. So, like ground meat, just, throw in some pasta noodles and things like that. So I eat less of that. So it's not like we never have it. We do still have it sometimes. Sometimes I'll try to do like a zucchini noodle or something, but sometimes we just still have the pasta. Like I said, moderation, but we eat a lot less of it. So I find that I buy a lot less of that type of stuff. And then in terms of like sweet treats and candy, I just buy less of that now and really just try to focus on treats that are less sweet in with like the low glycemic sweetener comment, like my previous point. One of the things that I'll do is I'll buy like yogurt, with a full fat yogurt. So my favorite yogurt has like 11% fat or something. And instead of buying the sweetened flavored kind, I'll buy the plain yogurt and I'll, buy some blueberries or strawberries or something and throw in a little bit of stevia or something like that. So you're still getting what tastes like a delicious, like sweet treat, but it doesn't contain a whole lot of sugar at all. So just different things that I found. And it's not that I eat less food. It's not that I'm super militant. It's just that I've gradually replaced a lot of the things that a lot of the processed foods, like I kind of gradually replace them with whole food options. So this has been a process. So this brings me to number 8, which I've addressed my love of chocolate. That had to be a point. So for me, even though like I don't eat gummy candies really at all anymore, that was like a lovely phase of my life. Like I think I ate enough gummy candies for a whole lifetime. Some of you were like, how many gummy candies did she eat? Holy cow, she keeps talking about it. It was a lot. So, but I still, I love chocolate. Like, I'm not going to just say I don't love chocolate. I love chocolate. I've always loved chocolate. Chocolate is wonderful, and I eat a lot of chocolate. So one of the things that I've done most recently is address that. Because for a while there, like I was eating dark chocolate and, not as much sugar. And then I would kind of go back and eating all these chocolate hazelnut things. But at the end of the day, I was eating a lot of chocolate. And regardless of, whether it's a little bit darker or whatever, it was contributing quite a bit to my sugar consumption. So one of the things that I've done recently is I've discovered some recipes to make your own chocolate at home that don't contain any sugar. So I found a recipe for what's called like a keto fat bomb. So I say that word, I'm not like keto. I'm not advocating for any type of diet. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just talking about the actual chocolate part. So what I've done recently, and this has been a very interesting kind of journey for me, is I've started making my own chocolate peanut butter cups. Now, this is actually a point on here because, like I said, I really love chocolate. And I know some of you really love chocolate too. And for me, it's always about not feeling deprived. So that's why I never gave up chocolate. Like, why would I give up chocolate? I love chocolate. I'm not giving up chocolate. And so if something brings me joy, if I really like it, if it's like I said, moderation. I don't believe in I'm never going to eat chocolate again, because that's not true. I will eat chocolate again. So, but what I did in my case is I just experimented with it. I saw this recipe and I was like, oh, cool. That means I could try a chocolate recipe, enjoy the chocolate without the carbohydrate sugar hit. And so I thought, let me see what this is all about. So I found a recipe and I made it. And so it was, I just bought non-sweetened chocolate and butter. So I suppose if you can't have dairy, you'd have to kind of look into what else you could use, maybe coconut oil or something, just depending, because I know coconut oil tastes like coconut. So it just depends on what else is available. But in my case, I can have butter. So coconut oil, chocolate, butter. And then instead of sugar, I tried stevia and I tried the erythritol and then melted that down. So I have like a method where I put like a glass bowl into a pot with water. So the water kind of heats up the chocolate and it doesn't burn. Anyways, like a double boiler thing. And then I like peanut butter as well. So I have peanut butter in there. And again, I bought unsweetened peanut butter and added some stevia to it for a sweetener. And anyways, so the recipe is fairly straightforward. You melt the chocolate, you put it into these, little, I use mini cupcake, a mini cupcake tray or something like that. And those little, the little, I can't think of the word right now, but yeah, the mini cupcake trays and the mini cake things. So you just put them in there. And yeah, so you put the chocolate in and then you put it in the freezer to let it cool and harden. And then, peanut butter and then freezer to cool, harden, and then chocolate again. So it's like a multi-layer thing. I'm sure there's lots of ways to do that. I'm just, I like the peanut butter and it's been going over well with the family. So we've just stuck with the peanut butter aspect of it. Anyways, so what I found just by doing that is I realized that I could enjoy a delicious chocolate treat because I enjoy chocolate enough that I'm willing to go through these lengths to keep having it because it's just a thing. But yeah, what I found was that by having an alternative that didn't contain sugar, I was able to dramatically reduce my sugar consumption. Because I was just eating, I always eat chocolate. So for me, that's the thing. That's the thing that I always have. And it's the thing that I don't restrict. So having the ability to kind of swap it out was very interesting to me. So that was kind of my experiment. And they're really yummy. So I didn't feel at all like I was deprived. It was actually, they're delicious. And I've made them many, many times. So that's one thing. And that's made a big difference for me, addressing my love of chocolate. Okay, so number 9, one of the things that I did is I tracked my nutrient ratio for a couple days. So I'll just put it out there that I am not a big food tracker person. I'm not one that obsesses about food and what she's eating. And I'm not one that's going to track my calories and try to eat a certain number of calories a day. So I don't have that type of a relationship with food. Hopefully through this episode, you can tell that when I'm eating, when I'm trying to figure out my meals, it's really about balancing the macronutrient ratio and thinking about which foods are going to contain the highest nutrient density. So opting for vegetables over rice because I know they contain a lot more, phytonutrients and things like that. So that's more of my focus. But for me, I had never even, because just the way that I am, because it's so kind of on that other side, I never even think about how many calories are in my food or what percentage, like how many grams of carbohydrate, because it's never even occurred to me. It was actually really beneficial for me to track my meals for a couple of days. So I literally tracked my meals for like 2 days. Like it was not this big thing. I downloaded an app, and it was like you could put in all the food and it would tell you what percentage was carbohydrates, fat, and protein. And then it would tell you how many grams. So I wasn't like devoted to the cause, and I wasn't obsessively tracking my food for, weeks and weeks or anything. It was like it literally lasted 2 days. But what I learned from it was invaluable. So my point earlier about the fruit, like I said, I had never really considered how much carbohydrate was in fruit. But when I used this tracker and I actually saw like, okay, like I ate 5 oranges today, and I actually saw that how many carbohydrates that entailed. And I put in just the things I was eating, and I would add in like, I put in a tablespoon of sugar or a tablespoon of maple syrup into my shake, or just, we had rice tonight, or we had pasta, or whatever the case was. When I was putting in and actually seeing the visual of like, oh, that's how much carbohydrates is in that. Oh, that's how much sugar is in that. That really opened my eyes to what I was actually eating. And I felt more informed. Like I felt like, oh, I get it, because you can actually see comparable. So you can put in like a chocolate bar, or you can put in a glass of orange juice, or you can put in a juice box or something like that, and see how much carbohydrates it is. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, sugar actually is sugar. Like, so sugar is sugar is sugar, regardless of what source it comes from. And for me, that was really, really helpful. So I'm not suggesting that you go wild and like track your food for, ever and ever and become totally obsessed about it and try to like eat a specific amount of carbohydrates every day. Like, I don't think that that's the way to go. And for me, food has always been something I really enjoy. I'm a huge foodie. If we were to hang out, like if we were to go for lunch, you and I, you would see that. Like, I just love food. I love the way it tastes. I really enjoy it. I savor my meals. It's just a wonderful experience for me. So I feel like I have a pretty healthy relationship with food in that way, that I actually enjoy it. And it's one of life's simple pleasures. And like I said, if I were to go to Italy, I'd be eating the pasta. I would want to try it. And I would really enjoy it and allow myself to enjoy it. So, but what I am suggesting is that if you've never done that before, or if you've never even, like, if you've never really been conscious about how easy it is. I think for me, that was what it was. It was like how easy it is for so many carbohydrates to like slip into what you're eating. And the way that our food guide is, the way that our current kind of overall understanding of food is, it lends itself to eating a ton of carbohydrates, and you don't even realize it. And it can have a really negative effect on your cycles. I've worked with many women who actually have issues with managing their blood sugar, who are somewhere on the PCOS section or on the PCOS spectrum, where when they eat a lot of carbs, their ovulation is delayed for weeks or months. And I've seen it where by kind of organizing that and starting to be more cognizant of the foods that you're eating, replacing some of those pastas and simple carbohydrates with vegetables, and being more conscious about balancing your blood sugar by eating protein and fat along with your meals, I've seen, cycles normalize completely from having previously been super long and irregular. So from like bringing it back to the menstrual cycle, the reason why this matters, and the reason why I'm going on and on about sugar, is because there's so many little areas where you would never even think of it. Like, there's so much that we eat every day that we don't even think about it being a source of sugar and carbohydrate. And when what tracking can do, even if you just track for a couple of days or like a week, so like maximum 1 week, is just the only purpose of that is to make you aware of it. So it's similar to tracking your cycles. Until you start to track your cycles, you're not really aware. So a lot of my clients will say things like, oh, I always ovulate on day 14 or whatever, or day 15. But then when they actually start to track their cycles, they'll see that sometimes they ovulate on day 12, sometimes they ovulate on day 16, and sometimes they ovulate on day 15. But before they were tracking, they just assumed that it was always the same time. So when you track, you actually see what's happening. And I think when it comes to food, like anything else, like we all have a certain idea of like what we eat, what we do. But when you track, you see what's actually happening. And so you may think, oh, I don't eat that much sugar. I rarely da-da-da-da-da. But then when you actually write it down, like when you actually put it into your little app tracker, all of a sudden you realize like, oh, and every day isn't an atypical day. So I think we all do this where we're like, oh, well, that was different. That was a barbecue. Oh, no, that day was different because we had people over. Like, every day isn't atypical. So like write it down regardless of whether you're saying it's like an atypical day or a normal day, and then see the average over the week, because that's more of an accurate description than your mind. Okay, so tracking, that made a big difference for me. And like I said, I only did it for a couple of days and I feel like it changed my life. So I do not track. I don't track now. I still have the app. So if I'm ever curious about like the content of something, I might poke it in there. But like I said, my personality is such that I'm not going to track everything I eat. But that just awareness of what's in the food made a huge, huge, huge impact for me. And so the last point, which I won't spend a ton of time on, is moderation. So that's been a theme throughout this episode. So like I said, I don't have any strict rules. I don't have like, I will never eat this or I will never eat that. If I really wanted like a piece of sweet chocolate, I would eat it. But what I'm saying is that I'm, over the course of the last like 10 to 15 years, this long journey, it's been a long journey for me to get to this point that I'm at today. What really has come out of it for me is what's important is what you do every day. So for me, that's the way I feel about it. It's what's important are the habits that you establish on a day-to-day basis. So my habit of always having half a plate of rice wasn't helping me because it was just a lot of carbohydrates for my body to handle. So now establishing the habit of like eating a ton of vegetables and then occasionally having rice whenever we want to is different, because the kind of the foundation, like the 80-20 rule, like 80% of the time, I'm really not eating all of that stuff. So I would say moderation, like I said, because you need to live life, right? Like, and we live in the world, and there's a lot of yummy, wonderful treats to enjoy. But I think what's important are those foundational habits, the things that you do every single day. And if you can get those under control, then the little bit of treats here and there don't matter, because then it's a legitimate treat. Okay. So what happened to my cycle? So yeah, like this has been, I think the reason I wanted to do this episode now is because even though I had been doing the vast majority of the things that I have just gone through with you, so within the last 6 months, within the last 6 months or so, I've done a few specific things differently, and it was just incredible to me to see the difference. So looking back at my early 20s, my cycles were really long. When I first started tracking, my average cycle was about 40 days. And I would often have cycles that were like 45 days or 50 days. And it was around that time that I was diagnosed with the issue with my thyroid. And I thought it was all thyroid. I thought, oh no, that's totally all thyroid. But as I get older, I'm not really sure, and I think that I definitely have a sensitivity to sugar. So I feel like if my blood sugar isn't under control, it affects my ovulation. And so I'll have no way of knowing that because I can't go back to like age 22 or anything. But I was eating a ton of sugar back then, and my cycles were quite a bit longer. So I would say overall, I've noticed a trend towards cycles that are more within the normal range. So my typical cycle these days falls between like 30, 32 days. Like it's, like I said, significantly improved from the 45 days of my 20s. So within the past 6 months, I was experimenting a little bit more with sweeteners. So kind of reducing some of that daily sugar consumption that was silent, that I didn't really notice. So instead of throwing, because I make, like I said, I make kefir all the time, and I make my kefir milkshakes and things like that. So I wasn't really throwing a ton of sweet fruits in there, but I would put in maple syrup to sweeten it. Now, if any of you have ever made homemade kefir, you'll know that it's pretty sour. And so I was always putting in like maple syrup just to sweeten it, right? Like that's just because I'm Canadian. Maple syrup is fantastic. And I was like, it's natural. It comes from a tree. Like, and I'm not like, maple syrup is great. And we still have it in our fridge right now. But what I'm saying is I was actually like relying on it on a regular basis. I didn't even think about it. It was just, like I said, it was silent. It didn't occur to me. I was just sweetening my drinks with it. So that's one of the things that I did. Like I just switched it up. So instead of using maple syrup when I'm making a shake or something, I would put in stevia. Instead of eating all the chocolate all the time, I decided to try to, make my own. And so then when I'm having my chocolate, there's no sugar in it at all. So it's just chocolate, butter, and stevia, and maybe a little bit of flavoring or something, but like no sugar at all. So I went from having like a regular chocolate, daily or several times a week to having my sugar-free, delicious alternative that contained none. And then just really focusing on low sugar fruits. So not eating 5 oranges, at a time anymore, buying more berries and things like that. So I would say within the last 6 months, those are some of the bigger changes that I've made. And I didn't really know what would happen. I didn't think that it would make a big difference for me. I thought, let me just try this out. Let me see, whatever. So what happened in terms of my cycles, which I think is just so, some of you may think that's not a big deal, but I was like, whoa. So I've been tracking my cycles, as you may know, for something like 18 years, like since 2000, since like the year 2000. That was when I first went to university, and that's when I first discovered fertility awareness. So it's like almost 20 years I've been tracking my cycles. And in that time, my luteal phase has always been about 12 days. Like it's never really been 13 days. Like it's always been about 12 days, like for all those years. And after I had my children, my luteal phase, after you first, like when you first start to wean, your periods start to come back. Like for me, I was breastfeeding. When my cycles first came back, my luteal phase was more like 11 days. And so it was like hovering around 11, 12 days. And I actually thought, well, I'm older now and I had 2 kids. Like maybe that's like, just normal for me now. So what happened was I, have been reducing my sugar content and doing all these things as we've been talking about. And for the first time in my life, I had a 14-day luteal phase. Like in my life, in 20 years of charting. And I know, especially for those of you charting, when your luteal phase is usually a certain length and like it goes a little longer, you kind of think, oh my gosh, am I pregnant? So I wasn't worried, like I was okay. But at the same time, like I remember thinking, like I'm ready, like I'm like got my menstrual cup in my purse, thinking like, okay, my period's going to come today, and it didn't. And I was like, interesting. And then the next day, like, okay, it's going to come today. Didn't come. Interesting. And then it would come. And then I realized like, wow, my luteal phase is like 14 days now, 13, 14 days. So that was what happened in my case. And one of the other differences that I've noticed is that my ovulation seems to be happening a little bit sooner in my cycle. So it seems like the ovulation was kind of tightened up a little bit. And also the luteal phase length was longer. So for me, I honestly, this is why I talk about charting the way that I do. Like even, we all get used to our patterns. We all get used to what we're seeing. But as a woman who's charting her cycles, the whole purpose of this is to really be an observer and not really project what you think should be happening on there. So, I've seen my cycle go through various changes throughout the years, so it wasn't like super alarming for me or anything, but I was definitely like surprised. Like I wasn't doing it to try to lengthen my luteal. Like I wasn't trying to do that. I was just doing this because I was concerned. Like I said, I have a family history of diabetes and blood sugar issues and high blood pressure and things like that. And as I get older, I've noticed that if I do eat a lot of sugar, maybe my ovulation's a little bit delayed or something's, changing in that respect. So I was just basically doing my own experiment to see like what would happen if I really just took a look at how much sugar, carbohydrate I was consuming and seeing what would happen. So in my case, that's what happened. My luteal phase lengthened by 2 full days. And like, I was speechless because I've been charting for so long that I didn't even think that my luteal phase would ever change. I just thought that that's what it was. So if that's any indication to you of how much sugar can impact your cycle and your hormones, then, that's a pretty big deal. So if you took my cycle as a case study, what that would potentially indicate is that sugar has the ability to, or sugar consumption, carbohydrate consumption, like excessive, it has the ability to lower progesterone production, obviously, because having 2 additional days of a luteal phase means that you're having 2 additional days of progesterone, meaning that you're getting more of it. So, again, this is like a non-scientific, like N of 1, right? Like not a controlled experiment. But I wanted to share that with you because, like I said, I was really surprised to see it. And I thought, let me share this on the podcast and just see if anyone else has experienced something similar or anything of that nature. So just to summarize all of the different points, the first thing I did was replace juice and pop with water. And so the only thing I drink now is water, raw whole milk, or kefir for the most part. Number 2, I went mostly gluten-free and I reduced my grain consumption. So ultimately eating less pasta, less rice, and less bread. Number 3, I changed my breakfast menu. And so I shifted it from a carb-heavy oatmeal focus to a combination, a balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrates, always making sure to include some sort of animal-based protein as well as fat in addition to carbohydrates. And instead of opting for oatmeal, opting for fruits. So more nutrient-dense carbohydrates. Number 4, I changed my plate, if you will. So instead of structuring my plate as such that half of it was rice, which is how I grew up eating, I've switched it up. So half the plate being vegetables, sometimes raw, sometimes cooked, sometimes a combination, as well as meat and possibly a smaller amount of rice. So basically changing the orientation of my plate at each meal. Number 5, I paid attention to fruit and acknowledged that certain fruits have higher and lower sugar and try to eat more of the lower sugar fruits, such as berries, like blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, etc. Number 6, I introduced low glycemic sweeteners or sugar-free sweeteners completely. So staying on the natural end of it, stevia, erythritol, coconut sugar, there's lots of different alternatives. Those are the ones that I've mainly been using. Number 7, I reduced my processed food consumption. So just opting more for fresh, whole fruits and vegetables, meat, dairy, just opting for more whole food options as opposed to processed food options. Number 8, I've addressed my love of chocolate. So I've replaced my beloved, regularly sweetened store-bought chocolate with homemade chocolate made with alternative sweeteners. So in particular, I was using stevia and erythritol so that I can enjoy my sweet treat without the sugar. Number 9, I tracked my macronutrient ratio. So I actually downloaded an app and tracked what I was eating for a couple of days. And number 10, moderation. Moderation is key. I don't subscribe to any alls or nothings with regards to food. I always allow myself to eat whatever I want to eat, but my goal is to try to change those regular habits that I'm going through day to day, but always with this concept of moderation. So with that said, that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode. And now I want to hear what your thoughts were. And I also want to hear if you've done any of your own experiments with your cycles and seen any shifts and changes. So I definitely want to hear more about what's happened in your cycles. So make sure to join us in our Facebook community, fertilityfriday.com/community, and we'll be talking about this in there. And for those of you who are ready to jump in and really master this charting aspect, if the concept of charting your cycles, feeling really confident about using the method for birth control or to try to conceive appeals to you, or if even after listening to this episode, the thought of being able to track your cycles over multiple years and see differences based on, dietary changes and just, different things that are happening in your life, whether it's different stress levels, that's the real value of fertility awareness. I think that many of us find it because we're looking for a solution. We're looking for birth control that doesn't require the use of hormones. We're looking for a way to really optimize our chances of conceiving by getting really deeply in touch with our cycle. But what happens is there's this third part of body literacy that happens when you chart your cycles, where you're always connected to how different changes that you make affect your cycles. And even 20 years in, as in my case, you can still be learning how different changes can affect your cycle. So it's a really incredible, valuable tool. And, to be honest, I can't imagine what my life would be like without it, because this type of experience that I'm sharing with you, I wouldn't have that if I wasn't charting, because I would have no idea what was going on with my cycle and how it was connected to my body. So make sure to join us in the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. So we will be meeting very shortly within the next few weeks. So if you're listening to this episode in real time, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. We still have a spot for you in the group. So head over, apply, so make sure to reserve your spot while they're still available. So with that said, I just want to thank you for tuning in to today's show. I appreciate all of you for spreading the word, for sharing the show with your friends, and just really spreading the word about body literacy, fertility awareness. Like I said, this is like a grassroots movement. the pioneers. And I really believe the world is going to be different. Every single woman, each woman, one woman at a time, as we learn how to chart our cycles, as we learn how deeply our cycles are connected to our overall health, not just our ability to procreate, the more different the world is going to be. And I believe that the world will change one woman at a time, because this is the type of information that can really empower us to make decisions about our health. Our fertility, our reproductive health, all of that, but also just our health in general as women. So thank you so much for being a part of the movement. And until next time, be well and happy charting.